On November 17, 2025, in Gyeonggi Province, South Korea, the Paju City Emergency Center received an urgent distress call. On the other end of the line was a man with an anxious voice, reporting that his wife was unconscious and needed immediate medical attention. As soon as they received the information, the paramedic team immediately set out. Following the address the man provided, they quickly identified the location and dispatched an ambulance to a military officer housing complex in Gwangtan-myeon, Paju City. When the ambulance stopped and the medical team entered the building, they began moving along the hallway to find the designated apartment. However, the moment they set foot in the hallway area, everyone noticed something was not right. An overwhelming stench hit them directly in the face, causing them to frown in discomfort. This odor seemed to grow more intense as they approached the caller's apartment. And as expected, when the apartment door opened, a wave of horrific stench immediately rushed at them like an invisible wall. The smell was so overpowering it was suffocating, forcing everyone present to cover their noses, no one daring to breathe deeply, with some even feeling nauseous because they couldn't bear it. The man of the house said his wife was in the bedroom and needed emergency care. Hearing this, the rescue workers immediately rushed into the master bedroom to search for the patient. But when they entered the room, the scene before them left them completely confused. They looked around everywhere but couldn't see any patient at all. Before them was only a bed cluttered with garbage and messy belongings, along with an old sofa covered in yellowish stains, sitting in the corner of the room. The room looked like a miniature garbage dump, nothing like a place where someone was living. After asking the man again, they were stunned to learn that his wife was sitting right on that filthy sofa, covered by a blanket. The medical staff were shocked and couldn't believe their ears, because this sofa emitted an incredibly unpleasant, horrific stench that no one wanted to approach. Below the sofa was a spreading black stain that looked terrifying, impossible to identify what it was. At first glance, this sofa didn't look like a place where a human being could sit or lie down, so by habit and instinct, they had completely overlooked it when they first entered the room. At this point, the rescue workers collected themselves, returned to the master bedroom, and went straight to the sofa. When they got closer and observed more carefully, they finally saw a human form lying motionless under the blanket. That was the man's wife. The scene before them was utterly horrifying, making even these experienced rescue workers shudder. A blanket soaked through and emitting a pungent stench was draped from the woman's neck down. Her legs had turned completely black, stiff and unable to straighten, contorted in an extremely abnormal position. Her face was almost entirely blocked by a phone stand. Normally speaking, a person of average build sitting on a sofa would be very easy to notice at first glance. But this man's wife was different. She no longer looked human at all. Her body was frighteningly emaciated, skin and bones. You could almost see every bone clearly through her paper-thin skin. That's why when they first entered the room, the rescue workers completely failed to recognize there was a person lying there. And when one medical worker slowly lifted the damp blanket to check the victim's condition, the sight beneath shocked everyone present. The woman on the sofa looked as though she had lost all signs of life, with no indication she was still alive. But when the medical staff moved closer to check carefully, they were extremely surprised to discover this woman was still breathing, although only very faint, labored breaths. The most terrifying thing, the thing that haunted everyone most, was the lower half of the woman's body. From her waist down to her toes, everything had turned pitch black, emitting an indescribably pungent odor. Some areas on her legs had even begun to necrotize. Although the upper half of the woman's body looked much more normal compared to the lower half, her complexion pale but still with some color, there were still clear differences from a healthy, normal person. Notably, on her shoulder was a fairly large wound, and this wound had also begun showing signs of necrosis. At this point, the rescue workers finally realized that the spreading black stain beneath the sofa was actually a horrifying mixture of fluids seeping from the decomposing parts of the woman's body mixed with accumulated dirt. Looking at her condition, this woman seemed to have completely lost the ability to move for a very long time. She had lain motionless on that sofa so long that all bodily functions had to be performed right there, right on that sofa. That's why the sofa, The blanket covering her and her entire body were covered with waste, creating an indescribable stench. And this terrible, extremely unsanitary living environment had accelerated the necrosis process in parts of her body, making the situation increasingly severe. Such a horrifying scene. For most people, let alone seeing it in person, they probably had never even heard of anything like it in their lives. It exceeded anyone's imagination about cruelty and inhumanity. Some newer rescue workers couldn't help but rush out to the hallway to vomit violently. They couldn't believe a human being could be treated so terribly. Although the scene was extremely terrible, emergency care had to be performed immediately. Because the woman was still breathing faintly, she was quickly loaded into the ambulance and transferred to the hospital in critical condition. There, doctors concentrated all their efforts on resuscitation, but ultimately, they were powerless against cruel fate. On November 18, 2025, the woman, having been neglected for too long, leading to severe systemic infection and successive organ failure, finally breathed her last and passed away forever. The husband also accompanied the ambulance to the hospital to monitor his wife's condition. When he heard the news of his wife's death, he suddenly collapsed and fainted right at the hospital. But the doctors who had directly participated in the resuscitation and understood the woman's tragic condition had a completely different perspective. They felt the husband's reaction was not an expression of overwhelming grief at his wife's death, but rather fear. Because throughout the effort to save the woman, the doctors had discovered many suspicious abnormalities on her body. The woman had bone fractures in multiple different locations on her body, fractures that didn't look like they were caused by normal accidents or falls. The deep wound on her shoulder, when observed closely, also had characteristics indicating it was created by external force from outside. Additionally, the woman's weight when admitted to the hospital was only about 44 pounds, a terrifying number for an adult. This showed she had been starved for a very long time. All over her body were numerous bed sores from lying in one place without being cared for, without being repositioned or properly cleaned. Therefore, the doctors suspected this was very likely a serious case of domestic violence and deliberate neglect leading to death. For situations suspected of criminal elements like this, according to the law, they had the duty and responsibility to immediately report to police for investigation. Thanks to the timely report from the hospital doctors, police quickly got involved and began investigating the case. Through verification, the unfortunate woman who died was named Ryu Sun-ah, 36 years old. The forensic agency, after conducting a meticulous and thorough autopsy, discovered that her body indeed had many bone fractures, confirming the doctor's initial suspicions were completely founded, and the serious wound on her shoulder was indeed caused by strong external force from outside. This meant she had been attacked and beaten by someone while still alive. Furthermore, the bed sores all over the woman's body had reached the most severe level in medical classification, where flesh had necrotized deep down to the bone. Such severe ulceration is extremely rare in practice because it can only occur when the condition appears and then is completely neglected for weeks without any treatment or care. This meant the husband had completely failed to care for her over a long period. And what really made police suspicious of the husband Kim was, his wife only had medical records from 3 months ago. At that time, signs of deterioration had appeared, but weren't serious yet. Her weight was still about 154 pounds, not much different from a normal person. But after that examination, Sun-ah never went to the hospital again. If the fractures and injuries were accidents or unintentionally caused by others, as a husband, taking his wife for timely medical care was the most basic responsibility. Moreover, the first examination had discovered problems, but there was no follow-up treatment whatsoever. This was clearly deliberate neglect. Therefore, police arrested the husband Kim right at the hospital when he regained consciousness. The woman's parents, hearing the news, quickly rushed over and happened to witness their son-in-law being arrested. After hearing the police description, the woman's parents sobbed uncontrollably. They couldn't believe that the person who caused their daughter's death was the husband who had been by her side day and night. Sun-ah's parents said their son-in-law and daughter had been elementary school classmates, having a very good relationship since childhood. As they grew up, They gradually developed romantic feelings and eventually got married. For parents, having their child find a partner whose background they knew well was the best thing. Therefore, this relationship received blessings from both sets of parents. And after marriage, their son-in-law had always been an exemplary husband. Besides treating their daughter Sun-ah very well, he was also very filial to his in-laws. In his words, this was, "Loving someone means loving everything about them." Unfortunately, after 10 years of marriage, the couple still had no children. Fortunately, Kim's attitude toward his wife didn't change because of this. They just raised 2 dogs for comfort. Later, Kim, who was serving in the military, was transferred to Paju City due to work requirements and organizational arrangements. Not only that, he was also promoted to a higher position. This was supposed to be good news, a career advancement anyone would want. However, his work transfer meant his wife, Sun-ah, also had to follow her husband and leave the familiar city she had been attached to for so many years. And after quitting her job at the old company to follow her husband to the new place, Sun-ah had to face a completely unfamiliar living environment. She no longer had her familiar social circle, no friends to confide in or hang out with, and hadn't found suitable new employment. Every day she just stayed alone in the apartment, looking at 4 walls with loneliness and emptiness. Gradually, over time, Sun-ah began developing depression without realizing it. Initially, it might have been just fleeting feelings of sadness, moments of feeling down and tired for no clear reason. But as time passed, when not discovered and treated promptly, symptoms related to depression became increasingly severe. She began having chronic insomnia, losing interest in everything, withdrawing and not wanting to communicate with anyone. Around August this year, her condition worsened further with the emergence of severe panic disorder. She frequently had panic attacks, rapid heartbeat, difficulty breathing, whole body trembling uncontrollably. At that time, she had called her mother in tears multiple times, saying she felt very unwell, something was wrong inside her, and especially that she didn't dare meet people, was afraid to interact with anyone outside. Hearing her daughter say this, the mother was extremely worried and immediately said she would arrange to visit right away. But Sun-ah stopped her mother, asking her to wait a while longer, until she got better and more stable before meeting. She didn't want her mother to see her in such a state. Afterward, the son-in-law proactively took Sun-ah to the hospital for examination and treatment. He even called his in-laws to inform them of the situation and reassure them not to worry too much. He would definitely take good care of his wife, would take her for regular doctor visits, and handle everything thoroughly. Hearing their son-in-law say this, Sun-ah's parents felt somewhat more at ease, trusting him to take care of their daughter. Not long after, Kim began attending military vocational training. This training was for those about to be discharged, which also kept him very busy. At that time, Sun-ah's mother worried her daughter had no one to care for her and called him multiple times, saying she wanted to come to Paju to take care of her daughter. But Kim refused every time. He said his training location was very close to his wife. He could use his free time to visit her. Moreover, during this time, thanks to his attentive care, she had recovered very well, so he told his mother-in-law not to worry. Kim specifically reminded her on the phone never to visit suddenly. Although his wife's condition had improved, she still couldn't meet people. Besides himself, others might greatly agitate her. Hearing such words, the mother-in-law could only ask about her daughter's condition through daily phone calls. And every day, Kim described in detail what Sun-ah ate that day, how her condition was. This way, Sun-ah's mother's worries really lessened considerably. Moreover, 11 days before, Kim had called her saying Sun-ah wanted to eat dried pollock. Since he didn't have time to buy it himself, he asked his mother-in-law to send some. This made Sun-ah's mother overjoyed. Her daughter had been sick for 3 months. This was the first time she proactively said she wanted to eat something. So she specially went with Sun-ah's father to Mokpo, South Korea, to buy the best dried pollock and send it to Paju. However, fearing they would startle their daughter, they didn't go upstairs, only stayed at the apartment complex below to hand the goods to their son-in-law. Afterward, Kim specially called to thank them, saying the dried pollock was delicious. Both husband and wife really liked it. Hearing this news, the two had begun imagining the scene of the whole family reuniting after Sun-ah recovered, But unexpectedly, what they finally received was news of their daughter's tragic death. From Suna's parents' detailed account, police gathered some useful leads for the investigation. First, they realized Suna had completely disappeared from her parents' sight about 3 months ago. Throughout that long period, all information about her health and life was only conveyed through Kim's one-sided account. Her parents never got to see their daughter, nor had any form of direct contact with her. Second, according to what Suna's parents shared, Kim had previously always been an exemplary husband, treating his wife very well and always showing thoughtful care. Only recently, in the past few months, had his attitude and behavior begun showing unusual changes. Based on this information, police speculated that Kim's change might stem from his wife's mental condition becoming seriously problematic, making him feel tired and frustrated with caregiving. It could also be because Kim was approaching his discharge date, and the appearance of this major life turning point, along with changes in work, income, and future, had strongly impacted his psychology, making him different. However, there was one thing police found puzzling and needed further clarification. That was the fact that Sun Ah had previously called her mother herself and said she couldn't meet people, didn't want anyone to visit. This was also the main reason why later, when Kim told everyone his wife couldn't interact with outsiders, no one doubted or questioned it. Everyone believed it was true because Suna herself had said so. So why did Suna say such things to her mother? Was this truly a normal, typical reaction of the panic disorder she was suffering from, or was there another reason hidden behind it? Could she have been forced or manipulated by someone to say that? The answers to these questions perhaps only Kim himself knew. Facing a barrage of questions from police, Kim appeared extremely calm and innocent. He insisted he had absolutely no idea his wife's health condition had become so serious. Only yesterday, when his wife suddenly fell into unconsciousness, did he realize the severity of the problem and hurriedly called emergency services. Kim recounted that about 3 months ago his wife, unable to bear the excessive mental pressure, saw her depression worsen. She began showing intermittent inability to care for herself, meaning sometimes she was lucid and could do everything herself, but other times she completely lost self-control, unable to eat, use the bathroom, or move on her own. And to better, more conveniently care for his wife, he had moved a single sofa right next to his bed. That way, whenever his wife had any problem or needed any help, she could call him immediately. Regarding why he didn't take his wife to the hospital when her condition was so serious, Kim explained that he didn't feel his wife had any serious problems. Because according to his observation, sometimes she could still stand up and walk around normally. Moreover, every time he mentioned taking her to the hospital for a checkup, his wife strongly resisted and firmly refused. She repeatedly told him she completely understood her own health condition. She also knew how to handle and care for herself, told her husband not to worry too much, just focus on his own work. Because of her firm refusal, he couldn't force her and couldn't take her to the hospital in time. As for the rescue workers saying his wife's legs had turned black, Kim admitted he had seen that before. However, at the time he thought because his wife couldn't care for herself, she rarely bathed, so he simply assumed it was just dirt, dust, and grime accumulated over time, never thinking it was a sign of severe necrosis. Kim's explanations and justifications made all the police present feel both angry and incredulous. Although they knew he was deliberately evading responsibility and giving absurd excuses, they couldn't help but ask one more question. The stench in the house was so overwhelmingly terrible, you didn't smell it? How could you live in such an environment and not realize something was wrong? Kim calmly shook his head and replied that he didn't smell anything unusual at all. He explained that his wife had used many different types of deodorizers in the house to clean the air. She even frequently burned incense to fumigate the room. And that strong incense smell often gave him headaches, so he couldn't smell any other odor. Facing his barrage of illogical excuses, police felt there was no need to ask further. They realized that for someone like this, someone willing to lie blatantly and evade all responsibility, only using solid, undeniable evidence could make him confess the truth. So police decided to go to the military officer housing complex where he lived to conduct a search and collect evidence. The Kim couple's apartment wasn't very large, quite modest in size. Although a day had passed since the wife was taken for emergency care, inside the apartment still emanated an unbearably pungent stench. And the neighbors living around the Kim couple's apartment, as if knowing in advance what was happening and having waited for this opportunity for a long time, as soon as they saw police appear, immediately approached and pulled the officers aside. They competed to say they had long felt something very wrong, very abnormal about the Kim household. A neighbor living nearby recounted that in the past 2 weeks, every time Kim came back from the supermarket, they noticed that in his shopping bags, besides enough food for 2 people and daily essentials, there were always additional bottles of soju in plastic bottles, along with water. And judging by the frequency he bought alcohol, he was drinking almost every day, getting drunk every night. Another neighbor living in the adjacent apartment quickly added more information. This person said in the past 2 weeks, every evening, from the Kim couple's apartment came loud banging sounds, sounding like smashing or heavy impacts against the wall. This noise didn't just appear briefly, then stop, but continued until 2 a.m. before going quiet. The nighttime noise plus the pungent stench in the hallway made the surrounding neighbors extremely uncomfortable and upset. They had directly complained and given feedback to Kim about this multiple times. And not long after being complained about, they saw him buy many types of deodorizers and air fresheners to use in the house. Since Kim had previously told police that the deodorizers and incense in the house were all used by his wife, police immediately asked the neighbors about this situation to verify his statement. As soon as they heard the question, the neighbors immediately shook their heads and firmly stated there was no way it was his wife using them. Although everyone in the housing complex hadn't seen Suna for months, before, when she was healthy and went out often, everyone had interacted and chatted with her quite a bit, so they understood her personality and habits. The Kim couple, having no children, had raised 2 dogs for companionship. Suna had told neighbors many times that their 2 dogs at home were very sensitive to chemical fragrances, easily irritated and uncomfortable. That's why she never used air fresheners, deodorizers, or similar things in the house to avoid affecting the health of her beloved dogs. Let alone using them in such large quantities, she wouldn't dare use even a little bit. Police nodded, then asked if they had noticed anything unusual about Kim recently. The neighbors thought for a moment, then said no. He went to work and came home normally every day, then walked the dogs. Before, when one dog wasn't feeling well, he even took the dog to the veterinary hospital. Moreover, his social media was continuously updated with daily life, looking nothing out of the ordinary. From the neighbors' detailed accounts, police gradually understood that Kim had been living with his wife throughout the 3-month period. He was still providing basic food for Suna daily, and might even have been handling some basic housework like cleaning. If that was the case, he absolutely could not have been unaware, could not have failed to understand his wife's increasingly deteriorating health condition. And the most terrifying thing was that throughout the 3 months his wife was gradually dying, he calmly ate, slept, went to work, and came home in this very house. Everything happening to his wife seemed to have no effect on him, didn't concern or worry him at all, to the point that when the dog in the house showed signs of being unwell, he took the trouble to bring it to the veterinary hospital for treatment, but never once took his wife to the hospital for a checkup. Why could he treat the woman he once loved so cruelly and heartlessly? Such a situation made the investigating officers extremely angry inside. The anger boiling within them further strengthened their determination to investigate to the end, determined to find the truth and bring justice for the unfortunate woman. So they immediately proceeded to examine and search every corner of the Kim couple's apartment. Police needed to find solid evidence showing the husband knew his wife was experiencing serious health problems, yet deliberately neglected her, didn't take her for emergency care or treatment. And very quickly, they discovered 2 letters hidden in the drawer of Kim's desk. Both letters were signed Sun Ah at the bottom, and the dates on the letters were all within the past 3 months. After reading the entire contents of both letters, the officers present felt even more heartbroken and sorrowful about Sun Ah's tragic fate. In one letter, Sun Ah wrote, "Is it because of me that your life has become so difficult and hard? I'm truly sorry for letting myself fall into this condition. I love you so much, please don't abandon me. Just thinking about having to break up with you, thinking about losing you, I feel like I almost can't survive. I shamelessly beg you, please give me one more chance, just one chance. From this letter's content, police could sense the deep love Sun-ah had for her husband. But at the same time, they also saw her lowliness, her pitifully low self-esteem, and above all, the deep fear and anxiety of being abandoned that she was enduring toward her husband. But the tone and expression in the letter always made people feel something wasn't normal. The other letter was much shorter and simpler, with content only. "Can you take me to the hospital tomorrow? Sorry for causing you more trouble again. I was going to take some cold medicine to feel better, but I ended up getting blisters all over. Please help me." Both letters were kept in the desk drawer Kim used daily. This meant he was completely aware of his wife's health condition and her pleas for help, but deliberately ignored them, turned a blind eye, and took no action whatsoever. Additionally, during the investigation, police discovered that since August this year, the water and electricity usage in the Kim couple's apartment had suddenly increased dramatically. According to normal statistics, a two-person household in South Korea uses an average of about 2,900 to 3,400 gallons of water per month. Before August, the Kim household also didn't exceed this figure, completely within normal range. But starting from August, their water usage suddenly increased to about 10,500 gallons per month, 3 to 4 times the average usage for a similar household. And the electricity consumption in their home also spiked dramatically at exactly this time. Through careful calculation of the power consumption of all electrical devices in the house, experts finally concluded that, unless the air conditioner in the house ran continuously 24 hours a day for the entire 3 months without stopping, there was absolutely no way to reach such a huge electricity consumption figure. Regarding this, police made a hypothesis. August was summertime, when the weather was extremely hot and humid. And at that time, signs of necrosis had begun appearing on Sun-ah's body, meaning her body had started decomposing and emitting a foul odor. So was Kim's continuous running of the air conditioner day and night to reduce the spread of odor in the apartment, while also slowing down the decomposition process of his wife's body in a low-temperature environment. As for the dramatically increased water usage, was it because Kim needed to use a lot of water to continuously wash away the stains, waste, and fluids in the house? Because if nothing had been cleaned or sanitized for 3 whole months, the house would have long since turned into a cesspool too filthy to live in. This once again proved Kim was fully aware of everything happening, knew his wife's condition, but deliberately neglected her, letting her slowly die in agony. So what exactly happened between these two people during these 3 months? Before understanding this issue, police still needed experts to confirm some things that happened to Sun-ah. First, can panic disorder lead to inability to care for oneself? Second, can someone who has lost the ability to care for themselves really, as Kim claimed, handle their own bodily condition? Experts said that when panic disorder attacks occur, short-term symptoms like rapid heartbeat, suffocation, and loss of control appear, which can temporarily impair judgment and action. But the attack duration is short, and normal function can be restored after it subsides, not affecting long-term self-care ability. Therefore, Kim's claim that his wife recovered intermittently and managed her own body was reasonable. So the question returns, why did Sun-ah become so unable to care for herself? Police suspected the husband may have engaged in assault during this process. Combined with the letters as well as Sun-ah helping her husband lie to her parents, police suspected there might also be a gaslighting effect here. After his wife became depressed, Kim exploited the fact that Sun-ah had no support system in Paju and was mentally vulnerable, psychologically manipulating her, making her increasingly centered on her husband while developing self-doubt. And the strangest thing was Sun-ah's necrotic condition. The main cause was not moving on the sofa for an extended period. She only had mental problems. Why did she stay on the sofa for so long? Police suspected the husband might also be the cause here. It could have been his command, or perhaps Kim was frustrated about his discharge, and his wife's mental problems became a burden to him. In such a situation, Kim developed twisted thinking. However, these were all police speculations based on the current situation, because their life only had 2 people with no third party knowing. In the situation where Kim refused to speak, the specific details they couldn't know. But fortunately, the letters and abnormal water and electricity usage, as well as the medical records from 3 months ago, could already prove Kim had known early on that his wife's health condition had serious problems. And all his answers to police were lies. Between husband and wife, when serious health problems occur, the other party has the responsibility and obligation to promptly provide help. This is not only a moral issue, but also a legal one. Moreover, based on the wounds on his wife's body, police had reason to suspect he was suspected of intentional homicide. And when police placed all the evidence before him, the words from his mouth still showed no change, only adding one sentence. "I'm very sad. I somewhat neglected my wife because of my discharge training." This statement of his was dodging the serious to focus on the trivial. He continuously emphasized this was unintentional behavior. If ultimately the unintentional explanation was accepted, he would at most face 5 to 10 years in prison. And due to Kim's military officer status, police and civilian courts could not try and handle him. On November 26, 2025, Kim was transferred to the Korean military police. Ultimately, charges would be filed by military police and tried by military court. On December 15, 2025, military police filed charges against Kim for murder. Police believed that as a spouse, he had the obligation to care for his wife. While knowing his wife was in critical condition and receiving her pleas for help, he deliberately ignored them, failed to implement necessary rescue measures, constituting murder by omission. Additionally, the prosecution added charges of negligent homicide of his wife, ensuring legal accountability against him. Finally, Kim's trial was scheduled for early 2026 to be held at Incheon Military Court No. 2. Hopefully by then he will be severely punished by law. And that is today's case. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.